Back to school time. All the kids having to go get on the bus or get dropped off at school, or if you're in high school and you can drive yourself, God bless you. Back to school starts earlier and earlier every year. It's like the beginning of July, they start back to school sales. I used to always hate that. It's like we've still got 6-7 weeks of summer left. Calm down. But here on the podcast, we're going to go way, way back in the day to what I remember about going back to school, specifically elementary school and middle school, and just the things that surrounded it. So that's what we're going to do right now. The very first thing that I thought of when putting this together for the podcast, going back to school, it was always that night before, having to actually go to bed at a reasonable hour after months of staying up till whenever you wanted to. Even when I was in elementary school, I think my mother would let us stay up not as late as we wanted, but I mean, we're talking 10, 11 o'clock. As long as we were quiet and not annoying. Then when it came time to go back to school, suddenly it's like 8:30, 9 o'clock. You got to go to bed. It's almost like you had to go to bed earlier just to make sure you got up on time to give yourself time to fall asleep. You know how it is if you've stayed up late several nights in a row and then you have to get up early for work. It's almost like you've got to go to bed earlier and wind yourself down. It's even worse as a kid. If you remember in episode 4 of the podcast, I went over old school clothing brands for back in the day. So I'm not going to dive too deep into the clothing because you can check that out in the podcast. But I will go into shoes. So 1980s shoes, yeah, we had Nike and Reebok. Nike with the Air Jordans, that was later on in elementary school was what I wanted, but they were so expensive. I remember going to Stride Rite to get shoes, and when I was really little, like elementary school, we're talking kindergarten through 5th grade was what we considered it down on Cape Cod. But I would get, I think the first shoes I had were Ruse, and they were Velcro. Does anyone remember Ruse? I think they're still around. They had a kangaroo logo on the side. But those I remember being one of the first shoes that I got as far as for school. You always wanted to look cool, but back in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, I didn't really care as much. I think I had Ruse, I had Puma. Later on, they had the Converse, the Chuck Taylors. I think I had those. I got them at Kevin McHale camp, but didn't really wear them. As you got more into middle school, that's when you wanted to look cool for the other kids, like you were showing off for them. That's where you wanted Nike and Reebok. And you were cool if you had an LL Bean backpack or a JanSport backpack. Those I always remember being the ones. I was one of 5 kids, so basically when I was maybe in 7th grade, by that point there were 5 of us kids all in school, so obviously our parents couldn't buy us all LL Bean and JanSport. Those weren't cheap, so we basically got whatever they could afford, which was fine, they worked. But you see the LL Bean or the people that had their initials on their backpack or their full name with like designs around it. And you're always like, oh man, I want that. I want my name with a design on my backpack. I think I wrote with marker on mine, like initials, just in case it got lost. So you had the new clothes, you had the new shoes, you had your backpack. You have to fill your backpack with school supplies. As it got more into middle school, you kind of knew what you needed. Elementary school, it was like a lunchbox and maybe a couple pencils and crayons. It was much simpler then. As you got into middle school, you needed the real supplies. I like the erasable pens. Those were pretty good because they'd always want you to write in pencil, but I didn't want to get up to have to use the sharpener, the one you had to crank. And it had the little spinning dial almost to fit different size pencils in it. So I like the erasable pen. Or the one that was the fatter pen that it was multicolored. So you push the side down and there were usually 4 different colors like red, blue, and black. And that was the time you'd have to have, I think they would give you a list of the supplies you needed. Almost like you would go in with a few things you thought you needed. And then you'd get a list with protractor and ruler and the compass thingy that had the little point, like you could draw the circle, you would hook your pencil into it and spin it around. Maybe that's more of an 80s and 90s thing. Of course, we needed a trapper keeper. I mentioned in episode 35 about that being one of the big 1980s fads. It obviously stuck around longer, but there was nothing cool. Like, you had to have a really cool design on your trapper, and if not, you had to put your own stickers and such on it. When you were younger, you got those scratch and sniff stickers that had like different fruit, or it basically was whatever the smell was, and it was animated on there. Those were pretty neat. In high school, you went, like, at first you had to have a regular calculator, like the normal little flat one. And then later on in high school, I think when I started taking pre-calculus, I needed the graphing calculator, which I might still have in my mother's basement, but it's the Texas Instruments one. It's bigger than any TV remote. And back in the 90s, that thing was as high-tech as it got. You could make the graph with the XY points on it. I think I even made like cheat programs in it, so I knew how to solve equations, which made me seem smarter. And then there was the first day, getting on the bus and seeing a lot of the people that you remember, kids in your neighborhood. That was always, at the bus stop. You didn't have to walk too far usually. I think in high school I chose to walk to a further bus stop because more of my friends were at that one. It's interesting because today kids get picked up in front of their house. Back then, I think it was at least 3 streets over that I walked to catch my bus. Not always, though. This was more in high school. I would just walk. But today you don't do that. That first day, you'd have the morning announcements bringing you back in, and everyone would be upset.
Good morning, Vietnam!
The first day was usually easy, though, just meeting the teacher and learning like what you were going to be learning about. You usually get your textbooks. That was in middle school, I think, was when I first started to have to do the covering your books. You get the paper bags and turn them inside out and make it into a book cover, and you could draw all over it. Because if you drew inside it and such, then you had to pay for it, and I don't think anyone's parents wanted that. I'll do a deep dive in a future episode about lunch and recess, because that's its whole different animal. That would usually be it. The first day of school, you get back on the bus and go home, and it would be, how was your first day? Although it usually wasn't bad. I enjoyed school for the most part, so I think I was an anomaly. I mean, look at me right now. It's like I'm teaching a class, although I don't know much. It's basically like all stuff that I'm interested in, and a lot of these things, history and the retro and road trips and such, that's all stuff from school, kind of learning how to put a lesson plan together. Like I said, we'll do deeper dives into other aspects of school as the school year goes on. But what are your memories about getting ready to go back to school? Those of you with kids, are you passing on any of your traditions you remembered growing up to them for school? Shoot me a message and let me know.